Recording. So could you just say that, like, what we're doing again today?
Okay,
So that,
all right. Sorry, we didn't start the recording. So,
thank you for the reminder.
yep. So we're starting the recording now, and all right, have you got it going?
Yep, it's recording now.
Okay, we're recording, and so we're going to cover the mostly Andrena again. We're going to look at some more examples of the female characteristics, such as the facial fovea, and then we're going to deal with the males. So the males are a lot more tricky because they don't have that one awesome character that defines them, and you have to go through a whole series before you learn simply that you're looking at an Andrena by the vibe. So we're going to cover male characteristics, and that's probably all we'll have time to do today. We'll probably do some interesting side things like look at pronotal collars, which is another tricky one that is important within Andrena, but a lot of people are mystified as to what a pronotal collar should look like, the angled ones. Okay, so going to, let's actually look at this again. So for those of you who don't have it, you can follow along on screen. We have the bee genera cheat sheet. Again, it's geared towards the eastern United States, but is applicable pretty much anywhere because a lot of these species are worldwide. And I'm going to sneeze in a second. Excuse me, that was very unprofessional. Although I don't know how to not sneeze. If we look at the Andrena, and we look at the first one is females here, we see that it's a pretty simple process, basically, that has these wide facial fovea, which we looked at yesterday. We'll look at a couple more with prone white to brown hairs. It is Andrena. Now the male, though, and we start looking at this, and I'm going to move the screen over so that characteristics are all in there. We have a lot more overlap with other groups, other genera that needs to be explored, shall we say. So a lot of people initially will misidentify the male Andrena because it doesn't have a very straightforward set of identification features. So we'll talk about these two subantennal sutures, what S8. So a lot of this is really good practice for any species. S8, what is S8? What does that look like? And straight basal vein, which we've now modified so that it is both straight and hooked or bent within the guide, but we'll look at a couple examples where it is pretty much straight. The coloration and marginal cells, all kinds of things that are going to be useful for a lot of different identification characters of other groups of genera. All right, so I am going now to the microscope, and I'm going to, actually I'll show you a couple female fovea, because again, the fovea thing seems to be something that many people have a difficult time with. So here is a female, lovely female, Pruinorum from the Dakotas, relatively common western Rockies area species. And also you'll notice that thanks to Clare, we have now a very large crosshairs, and we can actually take pictures, which we'll do in some cases too. So the first thing to note is it's a relatively hairy-faced bee, which makes it a little problematic to see the facial fovea. You can see the outlines of the fovea through the hairs, though. There's one side here and the other side there, but this is often a problem. So like down, so we know that the facial fovea always start up at the top of the head between the ocelli and the eye, but often the bottom is what we need to see in order to define the length of the fovea. So in this case, it's down here, but there's a lot of other hairs going in the area that are blocking it, and so we're going to change our angle of attack a little bit. So we'll angle it a couple different ways, so hopefully we get some better visibility. And this is what you would be doing with your hands, as mentioned last time. And so with a little bit of work, we can see that because the facial fovea always has tiny hairs, oppressed hairs in it, they'll reflect differently than the upper, let's call them normal hairs that are on the face of the female Andrena species. So here's the facial fovea. I'm going to outline it here. It's running up. Here, where there are no long hairs, it's harder to see, but you can basically see the edge of the facial fovea up there. We'll change the perspective on this later, and we can define the upper part. And there are other characters that have to do with the distance to the lateral ocelli from the facial fovea and things like that. But then just to show the overall, and it runs down here, and it looks like it curves back. So to define its actual length, we would need to move this several times and in several different ways to be sure that through the hairs up here, we can see the shape of the fovea down there and really get an accurate measure of its true length. Because you can see that in any particular shot, a lot of the facial fovea is just hidden by the longer hairs. So I'm not going to belabor that point. I just want you to get some idea of what you're looking for when you're looking at the at facial fovea in Andrena. And up here, again, you can barely see the upper end of the facial fovea, which is a slightly recessed area too. Okay, so now we're going to move to let's just show, we're going to move right to males. So this is the same species, Pruinorum, and we have a male here. And the question is, what makes this an Andrena male versus other things like Belida, I can't remember offhand, some of the other species, but pretty much any other bee. And it does not have facial fovea at all. So a couple things to note that are useful in telling it apart from others species. So here, in terms of orientation, stigma, marginal cell, the three, in this case, submarginal cells. So some Andrena have only two. And sometimes the three submarginal celled species have dropped a crossvein. So that's something to watch out for. So if you see something that only has two, sometimes that's a really good character, but always check the other wing. And because sometimes you'll find that, on the other wing there's three. And Gene Scarpula has done a paper on the number of occurrences that that are out there for different species groups. And it's relatively common, but in most cases, you don't get the crossvein dropped in both wings. So you have at least a good chance of determining whether it was originally a 3 or 2-celled bee, in this case, Andrena. Okay, so we have the 3 submarginals here, 1, 2, and 3, and the marginal cell. Now, one thing, let's zoom in on the marginal cell that separates some of these groups from others is what's going on with the tip of the marginal cell. It varies in terms of group, but if we look at the very end of the marginal cell here, what you'll see is the margin, so the edge of the wing here, and what we're looking for is the apex of the marginal cell, and the apex of the marginal cell is on the margin. So it's not, so the alternative, which we're not showing here, is that the apex of the marginal cell is separated out over here, and so which would be the furthest point from the base would be not on the marginal cell, but I don't know if I would use the term elevated, but separated from the margin itself. So in this case, it's lying, the apex is lying on the margin, and that's a useful characteristic for separating out quite a number of bee genera, although I tend not to use it very much. I guess perhaps because after a while you should be able to just look at an Andrena and go, oh, that's a Andrena, without having to go through all these various steps. So there is our wing characteristic. We'll look now at, if I can get a good shot of it, at the mysterious basal vein, which we can see, but is partially blocked by another wing cell here. That's a pretty good shot. Let me put it into focus. So this is better than the one better in terms of more classically. So you're upside down. So again, here's the wing edge. Let's turn it around. So I think that's a better reference point for people because that's usually how it's presented. Okay, now 3 submarginal cells. The stigma is folded back. You can't quite see it. That's the marginal cell. And here's the base, so the basal area of the vein. And here's the basal vein of the wing, rather, basal area of the wing. And here's the basal vein. And you can see that there is no strong arch or bend at about 90 degrees at the end. It's smoothly, with maybe a slight acceleration of the curve towards the end, but that's the non-helictidy state. So helictidy usually has that strongly arched end, except, of course, the nomiines often have don't have it as strongly, and they're scored both ways. Like now, Andrena is scored for both having a strong arch, as we saw in that one other specimen last week, and also for not having it, which would be considered the normal state. So we're already stretching traditional guides. So traditional guides, you would separate out all the helictids from the other species by that strong basal vein. But we're allowing a multi-state approach. So sometimes that works for some of the groups, but not all of them. So in this case, we're departing from Michener's work and others, but we hopefully will increase the probability of coming up with the correct answer. So there's the basal vein again. And now we're going to go to S8. So S8, so sternal, I'm going to take off the label here. Sternal segment 8 is an important one in Andrena, but largely never used in other species. So first of all, let's, oh, maybe it was the other specimen, but just to, again, some more orientation. In this particular case, the genitalia in this male are sticking out. So I would have to refresh myself in terms of the terminology for the genitalia here, but the genitalia are very distinctive, often at the species level. In Andrena in particular, they're used quite a bit. We tend not to use them because many times you don't have the extruded genitalia. It's retracted back in, and you either have to pull the genitalia when the specimen is fresh, or you have to go through a pretty laborious process, which may or may not result in damage to the specimen to evert it after it's been dried. So because we're doing a lot of volume stuff, we tend not to do that and try to come up with identifications that don't include genitalia characteristics. But it is a really good character if you have the time to spend everting genitalia that are not already everted. Mostly they're not everted though. So now so that's the genitalia itself. That's not part of the sternites. And let's see if we can get a shot here on the underside. So that would be the sternites. So all the plates, and you're looking at some of the plates here on the top of the abdomen, those would be the tergites, and there's a counterpart tergite on the top. Now we're looking at the underside, so sternites on the bottom. So here's a sternite. I don't know which one it is. It's probably 4, 5, 6, and then I don't know if this is going to be the best one. I'm going to get a second specimen here that may show S8 more clearly. And one reason to spend a little time on S8 is it's often a little tricky to see. We want to have something that's clear, in this particular case, clearly visible, so that you get familiar with what it looks like and can find it when it's not as accessible. So this one is. So notice, same species, but the genitalia, which this is maybe part of, are retracted. So this would be the normal state for a male Andrena specimen. This is the mysterious S8. And I just don't know that any other species group, except for maybe Epilus and Triepilus, and I'd have to go back and review that, do you even use S8? So S8 is narrow, so you can see the tip here. It's almost always out somewhere. Instead of, it's not going to be retracted in, you may have to do a little look for it. And it's can be visible from the top. We're looking at the tergites here, and sometimes it's visible, and usually I will spin the specimen on the upside down to see it. And so the presence of that is a pretty darn good indication that you have an Andrena male. And it's just one of those things that are often tricky for people to determine. And I also don't, I'd have to review Melita, which we don't have the guide up right now, because I think there's a character that uses hind wings for Melita versus Andrena. So Melita may have S8 that is in this shape. I don't know. I haven't looked enough. I'll have to look that up. If someone knows, you can add it to the chat level. Let's look at this from underneath, and then we'll look at a couple other specimens to get a sense of what S8 might look like under different circumstances. So we're spinning. Well, actually, let's, now that we've got the head, we'll return to S8s. Maybe it's good to jump around. I don't know. So I'm trying to bring in some light here. Male versus female characters. So if you saw that genitalia, you would know it's a male, but a lot of times the genitalia is not necessarily visible. So we go back to antennal segments. So within males of most species, and Andrena is no exception, the scape is much shorter than the counterpart in the female. And yet at the same time, it has an additional segment in the flagellar area. So there's always a pedicel and there's always a scape. The scape is shorter, and the count of flagellar segments is 13, no, well, yeah, is the total number of antennal segments is 13. The total number of flagellar segments would be 11, because the flagellar segments don't include the pedicel and the scape, to be a tiny bit technical. Let's see if we can get some light, better light in here maybe. Hard to tell, but you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see if I change the focus. 6, 7. It's always hard to do with one view. And 8, 9. Well, I'm losing my light into some of these areas on this antennal segment, but I think you have the general idea of what to look for when we're looking at, sorry about the phones going off. Pardon?
Is it pick?
Oh, that might be pick. Can anyone check and see if Discover Life is up? Yeah. That's John Pickering, who we call Pick, who created the guides, and he's our contact really for all these things related to the guides. Andrena, no, not up. Okay, it's not up. The male Andrena here, a lot of male Andrena have yellow on the clypeus. So sometimes completely so, like in this particular case, this pruminorum. I'll shift that a little bit. Other times it can be a spot, and sometimes, I want to get a better view of this pruminorum. Maybe I'll use the other specimen. Other times it's has, let's see if we can see it here, the yellow and the clipeus extends, as this does, in a little bit. I'm not quite sure why we're not getting as good a light. That's a little bit better. So again, the clipeus is the large plate at the end of the head over the labrum, and the labral process, remember we talked about that last time, as an important character, not necessarily to identify Andrena to genus, but if you're identifying species to genus. So if you look here, there's actually yellow outside. This is a suture line here that's defining the clipeus, and over here you'll see it also has yellow too. So sometimes you have small spots of yellow that can be defining in terms of what the species might be. I'm going to switch specimens now to get a slightly less hairy one, and we'll see if we can see the two subantennal suture line feature that Andrena has, but is often, it looks great in a book. Let me just tell you that. It looks great in a book, and then try to find it is in a specimen is surprisingly difficult. So when we talk about subantennal sutures, let me zoom out and find a specimen here. Let's see. So this is a female, but I'm hoping that it has, this is Andrena nasonii, which is a species that is very abundant in disturbed habitats and in general in the East. And if we zoom up here, so first of all, I just want to point out facial fovea, an incomplete look. It's quite broad at the top, not showing well because the reflectance isn't there, but it's going to go all the way up there, come down, and there's the bottom of it and up. So one of the features of Andrena nasonii females is a very broad, so you can see it basically extends from the eye to the ocelli, broad facial fovea in its upper surface. But what we're going to try to do, and is often fraught with failure because the darn bee has a very dark integument. We're going to go and look for subantennal sutures. So here's the antennae. This is the fossa, or the hole in the head of the antennae, and in Andrena, I believe Andrena D, but I'm not 100% sure, but at least within Andrena there should be two subantennal sutures, that one goes down that side and merges with the clipeus, and the other will be coming from this side and merges with the clipeus. But as you can see here, even though I'm on the highest power we have, for the life of me, I cannot find a suture at all. And that's the general problem. The surface of the integument is dark. You already have a lot of surface sculpturing going on. There is the busyness of all the hairs. So you can spend unbelievable amounts of time looking for the subantennal sutures. And then the problem is, if you only find one, then you're left worrying that the second subantennal suture was there, but you just didn't see it. So it is a theoretically awesome character that almost nobody uses because it's almost always extremely difficult to see. So as we have mentioned a number of times, if we were using our fingers, we would rock this specimen back and forth and look for the reflectance that would indicate where the suture lines are. But like, I am not seeing any indication of the subantennal sutures on this shot whatsoever, and we have reasonably good power and light. We'll try and take a look in a couple other cases, but I'm going to pull, and I used nasonii because it has compared to other Andrena, it has a relatively not hairy face. And the general notion of hairiness in the Andrena, hairy faces is a good character at the vibe level, I would say. So it's not definitive, but when you're just trying to get a feel for these groups, then a lot of times these kinds of characters, like generally has a hairy face with long hairs on it, is a pretty good one. But we don't use it in the guide because it isn't, there's a lot of exceptions, or sometimes, it's feels like it's not hairy because it's goopy. I'm now looking at a male Nasonii, and vaguely that little tiny line there and that little tiny line there maybe is the subantennal sutures. That's the right place. They swing off the let's call it the subantennal fossa. So that's where these are the holes here where the antennae go in, and it should be on the outside and then the inside of the edges and go down to the clipial rim. But super vague, as you can see here. We'll try and look at a couple other examples. Let's see now. So we have the male here of Andrena nasonii. We can look at the wing again just to get these characters locked in. And we're now looking at the basal vein, stigma, marginal cells, submarginal cells. And here is that basal area, not strongly curved, but it is gently curved for sure. So that gives you some sense of what Andrena basal veins look like. And many of the other species have basically the same look, and it's only the Lictidae that some of them have strongly hooked ends. Then we go back up to the marginal cell, and again you can see margin of the wing, marginal cell. The apex of the marginal cell is right dead on the edge of the wing, so it's not separated from it, but it's on the wing. So that's a good character. And now let's see if we can find S8, and then we'll go back and probably look at, so I'm looking at the underside now.
Dan, we have a question about S7. Is that
S7?
Where was it? Could you show S7 from the ventral side?
Okay.
And also, just somebody commented that S7 is used in Melita in the Swiss key. So just want to make sure everybody.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll have to review that. So if the person making that comment wants to expand on that a little bit. So, and also, there are a number of online guides. I think we sent out links early on. I think there's a good one in Canada that also look at genera. And so the European one, any European guide to the genera of bees is going to be a useful guide to go through, because those characters should remain the same as...
We've not sent that out, so we'll need to do that this week.
Okay, so we'll take a look. I believe there's some, but I just don't remember. There's some other structures down here on S7, 8 area. So, okay, we are in on the underside. So we're looking at the sternites again here. So these are the sternites, and here we're not going to get into this, but I'll just point out this would be S7, or is it S6?
S7 is the final on a male.
Yeah. Well, S8 is the final.
What was that?
Yeah. Well, it is on the normal, traditional, visible one. So we'll have to go back and review. But this last area, let's call it, and I'm, again, I'm using these things without knowing the terminology necessarily myself. This last area is important. There's things like whether this is bent back, its shape, whether there's extra hairs. When we're down at the species level in Andrena, which we will eventually get to, we're going to spend a lot of time looking at what's going on here. But this projecting S8, which may or may not, I guess we have to figure this out, be part of how to separate from Melita is a good character. If it's present, it's going to lead you to being confident or more confident that you have Andrena. Remember that in the spring, at least in the East, Andrena is a huge presence in almost all kinds of netting surveys and traps and other things. So you will get a lot of Andrena no matter what. And so over time, you'll just begin to recognize it from its size and shape. But here's S8 again, and it's good to point this out because, again, it's a hard thing for some people to find or feel confident about when they're looking at specimens. Note also there's no genitalia exposed here. It's retracted inside the abdomen and not visible. On the other hand, it is not in, pardon?
We asked for a repeat that, please.
You want to repeat that? So here, this is S8, this, and the shape, the end shape, this is flat. And in the other one, when we were looking at pruinorum, it was rounded at the tip. That, again, is going to be an important character for separating species out in Andrena. Andrena is actually, even though they're all little black bees to some extent, there's actually tons of good characters, but a lot of them you need to learn what to look for when in these shape kinds of things. So for right now, that's S8, and you see no genitalia visible here because the genitalia, which are quite large, are retracted inside the abdomen. And that's the normal state. But it's quite regular to see for whatever reason, the genitalia are exposed, but normally they're pulled in and not therefore useful. But almost always you can find S8 somewhere. All right, now let me go to a different species. Nasonii, that was a Nasonii male, is a good example of about as generic a Andrena as you can get in terms of, you almost identify it by the lack of any outstanding character when you go through the key. So it's often tedious to go through the key to at the end realize that you're looking at just at a yet another male Nasonii. But maybe if we have time, I'll go back and show you a little Nasonii trick. So here, zooming this down, we've got a male perplexit, which is a large Andrena, and it matches the subgenus on the surface of Melandrena quite well. Very large. In this particular view, it's not so obvious, but the ocelli, I'd have to turn it over. The ocelli are quite a distance from the edge of the head. I want to show you again the antennal segments and things here. So if we back off a little bit, we can see lighting a little bit tricky. Oh, maybe because I'm using white clay instead. I should go back to black clay. So here, or maybe I should shift to, hang on for 1 second. I'm going to shift this to a black background. See if that's useful. This. Ooh, yeah, indeed it is. All right. So here's the antennae. Now very nicely visible. And we can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Often there's different colors near the base. 11. So you can see there's the boundary between the two. So 11 flagellar segments, pedicel, the ball joint, and the relatively short scape. Hairy face. So I'm going to show now because we have this specimen here, the very tricky for the people starting. Let's see if I can get a good, this is a very dirty specimen, but this is the problem. Like this, the pronotal collar was I should break its head off. Maybe I will.
You can also show how to shave.
Well, Yeah, you can, on a lot of specimens, if you can't see because the hairs are very thick, you can shave. I don't know if I have the abilities to do that, but let's at least demonstrate it until I knock the head off. You can shave the specimen to see, like in Melisodes, you're going to look at tegula shape sometimes. It'd be like, how do I get to that tegula? So let me move this a little bit. So this is awkward in a this picture, but usually you take the pin and you're going to just literally use the tip of the pin and scrape. Clearly, I am not going to be any good at this on here, but scrape hairs off to see the feature you want. I'm just going to, this is a common species, so we have now removed its head, and hopefully we will be able to see the, and we have 50 some boxes of specimens. Oh, that worked out actually quite well. We have 50 some boxes of specimens that we are looking at hunting down postage for. Turns out it's not inexpensive to send these things. All right, so now we're going back to pronotal collar. So let's get oriented. So what we're looking at is the edge of the scutum here. So the pin usually goes through the scutum. You have the bases of the wings with tegula on them, which are the wing base protectors in lots of ways. The head was here, and then this feature going down here and usually around, it's difficult to see, around like that, and then back up and then over here. This is the pronotum. So the pronotum is more extensive than it would appear. You could think of it as a collar, okay, if you want to use simple terms. And a really important feature within Andrena that comes up over and over again in terms of separating them out, but also one difficult for the beginner to learn. They'll talk about the pronotum or pronotal collar having corners or ears or even ridges. So in looking at this, this is pretty good, although of course not perfect. If there were no corners or ridges, then this whole pronotum is basically like a big horse collar. Not that anyone knows what a horse collar is anymore, but it's going to be a smooth shape without any basically projecting features. When you have corners like this one does, let's see if we can get an even more close and see if that's going to be useful. Yeah, I think so. So you have this kind of situation. And let me get this a little bit more in focus. I'm glad I got this bigger crosshairs. Not super great, but see this right here? It's actually, if this had a smooth cornerless pronotum, you would not see this line here. So there's like ears sticking out or projecting a thin leaf, you might call it. Lamellate might be a word that you would use if you want to be fancy. But this is clearly not conforming. And this edge often runs down like this and forms a ridge across the pronotal collar. When you have a head on here, it's of course a little more tricky to see. And sometimes, so there's the other side of the pronotal collar over here. Maybe we'll shift to there to see it too. But a lot of times you have to peek around the edge of the head and look sideways in various directions to see whether that collar is there or not. But let's back off to a larger view here and focus. So again, the body is going back that way. So the corners are at the upper edges of the where the scutum and the pronotal collar start to fall away to the sides. And they're always in that same location. It's not like that moves around. Let's see if we can get this in a slightly different position.
Sam, what's the difference between the pronotum itself and the pronotal collar?
The Good question. So the pronotal collar is part of the pronotum, and this is a feature in several different species. We would look at the collar area. So the collar area is this upper edge here. So what we're looking at is the pronotum, but the collar area of the pronotum. And so think of it like a regular collar, although clearly not in this case. So the edge of a collar, and I'm touching my own collar for some ridiculous reason, is visible at the top. When the head is on, you can still see this collar back there from above. And in something like Hylaeus, there often are markings on that collar. In Andrena, the presentation of that collar, which is just the narrow area that you can see that's between the head, now gone, and the scutum, is just that rim area. And you can then make out that, oh, look, here we have one corner, and here's the other corner, slightly less visible, of the pronotum. And so this is what we would call a pronotum with corners or angles on it. And these would not be there. This would just be an entire smooth surface. And we'll go to one of the others here in a second and show that alternative.
We are at 15 minutes left.
Oh my
but
God.
We don't have any questions in the queue.
Okay. So let me angle one more time here, because this is an important, again, important and tricky feature for most people. Now we're on the other side. It's a little more difficult to see, and I'm not going to try and scrape off the hairs, but it'd be the collars in that area. And normally on a specimen of Andrena, one side is, it's a lot easier to see the pronotal collar area and whether it has strong corners or not than the other, because of the way the head is tilted. Almost, I'd say in 95% of the cases, you can see that feature with a little bit of work and a little bit of practice. Okay, that specimen is destroyed. Oh, let's look at the let's look at S8 in this Perplexa and see what's going on there. I did not preview these specimens, so which is good, right? It's reality. So there's the Tergites view on top, and normally you don't see much of, you're lucky if you can see S8 projecting out, and I don't see it at all right now. So let's turn it over, and so there's no genitalia projecting out either. And zoom down, you might have to zoom in here to see something. So I'm going to bring it over, and I'm not going to spend too much time here. There's a lot of hair, which sometimes there is in the area, and like a lot of these kinds of things, I can probably find S8 if I start looking at a lot of different views of the same area, and sometimes the hairs occlude it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is going to be S8 in that area, but again, difficult to see in all the hairiness going on here. So let's zoom back out and go to a specimen with a pronotal collar that is smooth, which would be our friend Nasonii, which is so common that I don't feel bad about snapping its head off. So, and in general, males and females can have pronotal collars, but in males, the collars are often far more pronounced than the females. I have no idea why. And in a few cases, the collar almost entirely shows up in the male form, and the female has none. But most of the time, what a terrible looking specimen. Okay, so orientation again, we're looking at right down to the head, and we're looking at facial fovea right through there. Again,
all male Andrena have pronotal collars with corners.
No, sorry. So there, if you're looking at a male and a female of the same species, almost always, if there is a pronotal collar, it's more pronounced, sharper, and often with a glossier surface in the male than the female. Okay, so we're looking at a female though, and so here's the scutum in the back, okay, right there. There's the head right there, and there's a gap between. It's not really visible enough to bother with, but the part that is visible right there would be the pronotal collar area. So it's just a narrow part of a rather extensive segment of the bee that is often covered in hairs and hidden by the head, which is fits in there. So here it is from the side, if we zoom in here a bit, you're not going to see much, right? Because again, we have this problem of the head being in the way, and so we would be wiggling our view back and forth between our fingers to see inside here to look for what is a smooth surface. And here is a pronotal lobe. So this is the pronotum right through here. That's the edge of the scutum. And there is this lobe right there. So in Andrena, I can't think of a single instance where that lobe is interesting. But in other species, the hair color is different on that lobe, and there is sometimes colored markings. So, but Andrena, gosh, I can't think of anything any species that's been the case. And as usual, if you can think of exceptions or corrections, just throw them in the chat for everyone to see. Okay, I'm now going to take the head off the specimen, if I can do that without any other problems. And we'll see the pronotum. Oh, it came off. Okay, now theoretically, when we go to the specimen, get a little bit better view, we'll be able to see the pronotum again. And I'm going to zoom up here and see the state of not having corners. If we were doing a dive into, now the pin is at a weird angle here, but so again, orientation. This is the scutum. The hairs are on the scutum in this case. This is where the head attachment area. This whole area here, there's a pronotal lobe coming up to, this is the collar through there. And you see this is all smooth. That hair is in the way, so I might shift it to the other side also. But there is no little ears, corners, whatever, different people call it different things there going on. So this is pretty good shot. This hair is in the way, but see, this is all smooth, whereas this would be curved in. There'd be a projecting curve as there was in Perplexa, and then you almost always a ridge running down in this direction. This is that horse collar look. So everything is smoothly rounded over, however you want to describe it through there. I'm going to flip now to the other side and see if that is illuminating in some way.
Can you say what species this is again?
This is Andrena nasonii, very common species in the east. Oops, and can't remember how far west it goes. So, okay, pronotal collar, slightly different view. This is the other side, but same idea. So this is the scutum, and below this is a mesepisternum, which we haven't really spoken about, useful elsewhere, but not in this case. And this is the collar, And you see there's no, again, this would be about where the ears are or the corners. And I don't see, the problem is it's terrible specimen. And so the hairs are gooped up with something, but there's nothing going on. There's no ridges. This is all smooth. We'll do one more view straight on and get this down to there. Okay. So the head area is gone, and you see this whole thing is all smooth, no corners here and here. This is the scutellum up here, and the head is gone, but this is the pronotum at that point. We can do a quick look on this specimen. Nope, I think we're good. I'm going to stop there and ask for questions. I can show a couple other things on these Andrena. I'm sorry, Discover Life is not working. Well, actually, I'm going to flip to here and see if there was anything else. Two subantennal sutures. Let's see, we can go up here and click on this. Is now too big of a cursor. So these two subantennal sutures, great character if you can find it. Mostly not useful because you can't find it. And I have just known people who pull their hair out trying to find it. It's not useful. S8 narrow, almost always visible in the male. So we're just talking males now. Is almost always visible. A little hunting, and we did some examples so you get an idea what S8 is looking like. Is projecting out. It's not retracted. I think all bees have an S8, but usually it's completely hidden and you'd have to dissect it. Straight basal vein, we talked about whether straight is really straight, but we're really using that as shorthand to be not as curved or bent as in halictidae, black thorax. Okay, we saw that. Other species groups, Hylaeus and, well, not all Hylaeus, but things like Calliopeus have some kind of light markings on their thorax. Marginal cell pointed, okay, so pointed and laying right on the marginal wing is useful most with 3 submarginal cells. I'm going to point out, because although it's not mentioned here, okay, let's do this. Let's go to Melididae, because this is the most difficult to separate out. I believe it's at the bottom. Everyone puts the Melidids at the bottom. Oh, I guess it's not there. Is in here. So, are we ever going to get through all these? It's deliciously complicated. Okay, here's Melida. Okay, female on top. Male at the bottom. So the female does not have the facial fovea. Okay, what do we say here? Integument, brown or black. 3 submarginal cells. Okay, neither of those separate from Andrena. Tip of marginal cell laying on the marginal wing. Ditto, same as Andrena. Antennal bases at or above the middle of the face. Not different from Andrena, but different from Diphoria, which is something similar. What did I have here? Oh, separated from the clypeus by more than a diameter of an antennal socket, also the same as Andrena. Labrum broader than long. I think that fits. I never look at the Andrena labrums themselves, just the processes. So I can't be absolute, but I believe that's the same as Andrena. This is the one that I think is different between it. Jugal lobe of hind wing greater than 1/4 the length of the vannal lobe, but I believe is less than half the length of the vannal lobe. And I believe in Andrena, it's almost always quite a bit longer. Excellent, not projecting. You can see there's so many characters here. It's a murky species, tegula oval, to tell apart absolutely. And a lot of people, I see in a lot of collections, identified specimens as being a Melida, or people in the lab being stuck down there and being frustrated. And it just means that it's tricky to tell from some of the other groups. So, so no mention of S8. So I believe that is a feature that will separate it from Melidity, or from Melita. So
We have 1 minute, but no questions.
Okay.
Unless anybody who I've been answering in the chat want to any follow up from Sam.
Yeah, I'm talking too much.
Personally. In the chat, we've talked about shaving. Our Andrena, the only, if you can't see the fovea, or suture's a good thing with Andrena. And I'm going to send the cheat sheet back out that he was just looking at. If you need it immediately, just check your email. I sent it early on with an attachment with all of the other cheat sheets he's referred to, all the Andrena and Lisa Blossom. Yeah. If anybody wants to chat in, unmute, please do.
All right.
Is S8 not present on other genera or just shaped differently?
I'm going to say it's shaped differently. It certainly isn't projecting out. Like, it's not a feature in any of the other genera that I work on. Again, someone can also mention this, but we're looking, there are lots of reasons to look at the tip ends of bees. So my impression would be is that if there were a lot of S8s lounging around in other genera, we would have noted them. And I can't recall a single one. I rarely see Melita, so that's why I'm hedging, but it sounds like because we didn't mention it as a separator, that it's not a feature of Melita either.
Okay.
All right.
We don't have anybody else asking questions in the chat, so just a reminder, I'm just going to be sending out follow-up emails from here on out. I will attach the cheat sheet. Hopefully we'll have Discover Life up soon. Video should be uploaded by the weekend, probably on Friday. And yeah, I think that's all. If I forgot anything, check your email.
Thanks, everyone. How do I stop sharing?
You hit the X.